Welcome to MMA Fancast. My name's Luke Payson, and I am honored to be joined by first-time guest of the show and main event for 247 Fighting Championships Brawl in the Burgh 17, July 15th, and that is Kyle Zimick. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great having you on the show. I kind of already said why it's exciting to have you on the show. So let's jump into that. You're taking on Justin the General Patton. It's a big fight. It's the main event. So talk about what had you sign on to fight him, and it's also your debut in 247. A lot of things going on very excitingly for you. What made you sign on for this fight? Let's talk about it right away.
Yeah, well, I mean, one, obviously, first chance to really start to get into a different region. Been fighting out of the Midwest, so chance to get over to PA is always a great opportunity. And he was willing to sign the contract. Something I've been having a bit of a difficulty with is people not wanting to sign on to fight me. And he's up for the challenge, so I'm up for the challenge to take him on. So I'm excited for it. Should be a good night.
Well, it makes a lot of sense, and I think that's kind of cool that not only is it an opportunity for you to come into a new area, but you see it as an opportunity to get a pro fight. It is strange. Yep. People probably don't know, but when I started interviewing up-and-coming fighters or Dana White Contender Series fighters, people like that are making their way up through the pro ranks, it's odd how often at the UFC level they kind of have more control, more or less, over the fighters. They kind of make fights happen. But at the regional level, it's really hard for a fighter like yourself who wants to fight to get matches sometimes because nobody really has to take fights. So it is kind of strange how that happens. You said that it is a challenge for you, and it's also a challenge for the general. So let's talk about that. What do you see as a challenge for yourself? What are you looking to kind of build on and face? And what do you think might be a challenge for him as far as facing you? Without giving fight details away.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, he's sporting right now a 4-2 record, I believe. So, obviously he's winning fights. He's on a 3-fight record win streak right now. So, whatever he's doing, it's working. He's in there and he's winning fights. So that's what you got to do. But yeah, it's always fun because you can look at guys and you can figure out stuff. And it's like, obviously looking at him, like, he's a good wrestler, right? Good at controlling top posture. And like, we've seen that very successful even at the highest of levels. So it's a good challenge for me to be able to push myself and figure out how to overcome a puzzle like that of how do I make sure this guy can't just dominate me and take me to where he wants the fight to go, and how do I use my abilities to counteract what he wants to do. So yeah. I think and challenge for him, like coming out of the Midwest, we have a lot of wrestlers up here, so it's I was a wrestler, and I like to believe that I'm not someone you're just going to take down and hold down. I'm going to give him everything I got. So if he can do that, more power to him, but I plan on making that a very difficult situation for him.
Well, and that's why this is the perfect hats off to Jim Mooney, head matchmaker for 247, putting this fight together, because your confidence level, your skill level, I can see by that beautiful cauliflower ear that, you've been wrestling for a while. And yeah, it is, Pennsylvania really prides themselves on wrestlers. Yep. Sounds like the Midwest prides themselves on wrestlers. So it's going to be a great matchup on that. You're 1-0 as a pro. You made your debut back in January. So you're fighting, even though you said about wanting to fight more often, at the pro level, fighting 3 to 4 times a year is kind of what most people do. It sounds like you would even fight more than that. But let's talk about that. You won by rear naked choke. Obviously a great debut, but kind of walk us through it a little bit. Tell us a little bit more about how you were feeling and how it went for your pro debut back in January.
Yeah. So yeah, actually for that one, I was supposed to have my pro debut even before that. And once again, like you're saying, regional scene, I had a few guys drop out and I was not able to fight on a card. So it got delayed. Same thing, had some opponents, and a couple weeks before the fight, all of a sudden they started dropping out, and it was like, oh boy, here we go again. But yeah, thankfully I had an opponent step on late notice. And so it was one of those where it wasn't what ideally want out of a pro debut. You know, you don't have this long 6 week buildup where it's like I can study the guy, figure everything out. It was all of a sudden like, well, what we're planning for, this guy does the opposite, but let's do it anyways, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, it worked out. First round, everything went pretty smoothly. I ended up catching him on the feet and rushed in like an idiot. He ended up taking me down, controlled it, but it happens. And then second round, he went for the takedowns, scrambled a little bit, but ultimately I ended up on his back and taking home the victory that night. So played out in my favor.
Which sounds like you said, it wasn't a perfect setup. You took it last minute. You might have made a couple tactical errors, but you capitalized. We talk a lot on the broadcast about being opportunistic, and that can happen striking. That definitely happens on the ground, right? So you got the opportunity to be opportunistic and grab the win. So thanks for walking us through your pro debut to give us a little bit more understanding of you, because it's always exciting to have first time guest, and you're jumping in, at least in Pittsburgh region, you're jumping into a to a big time fight, because these fights are pay-per-view and obviously in person and all that. The 247 Live app is great for streaming, or 247fighting.com. And if anybody isn't making the trip, they can give you credit by selecting your name at checkout. Sometimes we always got to remind pay-per-view people to do that, so that way it actually goes towards you. But you have a 9-2 amateur record, so you're jumping in. It could seem 1-0 as a pro, but super experienced. I'm sure that's not even all the fights that you got matched, because amateurs, you can get matched all the time and fights fall through. But you did have an 11-fight amateur career. What was it like sort of developing? A lot of fighters go pro faster. It looks like you were something like 5-0 in your amateur, 6-0 in your amateur career, and then still, built more, obviously finished with a 9-2 record. What had you kind of continue to develop in amateur? Why did you go pro after 6-0? And why did you go pro when you did, as far as, realizing that it was time to step up? I'm just curious, because that's a great amateur record, and really you built up quite a lot in your amateur career.
Yeah. For me, it was one of those where it's like we just didn't want to rush anything. I've seen a lot of examples of guys get off to a hot streak, 4-0, 5-0, 6-0, and they decide, okay, it's time to jump into the pro ranks, and things don't go as planned. All of a sudden you find out real quick is like, oh, I've got a glaring hole in my game, and it's too late to be fixing it. So yeah, I started off hot, and at first it was like nobody could really touch me on the ground. So I was just taking everyone down, beating them up, finding my submissions. Then I ran into a good wrestler, and he was a little more active on the feet than I was. Took my first loss. But yeah, it was just, and then it just continued on. It was like I was always just looking for the next hard fight. Like, show me where my holes are. Show me where I can improve my game that much more. Because when I go pro, and when I jumped into the pro ranks, it was like I knew, and I was confident that it's like I don't have these big holes anymore. Like, if you're gonna beat me, you got to beat me on a small detail, and it's gonna be hard to do. So it was like I used my amateur career as like, let's make sure we've got everything patched up, ready to go, because come pro time, it's time to hit the road running.
Yeah, and that sounds like a very disciplined approach, and it can be very tempting. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing if somebody gets off hot, 4-0, 5-0, like you were 6-0 to go pro. But to your point, you wanted to make sure you developed everything and worked out. And hats off to you. You were taking tough fights. That's what amateurs should be about. You were 6-0, ran into a slightly more active, on his feet wrestler. Then obviously you bounced back from that and built from there. Let's talk about your gym. Let's give a shout out to them by name, and talk a little bit about your training partners or your head coaches, or whatever that gym environment is for you.
Yeah. So I train out of Wausau, Wisconsin, at a gym called Rising Sun MMA. My head coach is La Tao. Yeah, he's a world-class coach. Might not have the name always, but definitely a world-class coach, and I love the guy. My training partners, they're always willing to do everything they can for me. I got guys in the gym every day asking me, hey, what type of looks do you need? Or, hey, how can I make sure you're ready? Hey, how can I do this better for you? I've got experienced guys in there, guys like Scott Ritz, who, just an absolute tank of a person. And it's like, it's everything you need. I've got the experience to help me out. I've got the bodies and the looks that I need, and I've got amazing coaching.
Well, yeah, that's about everything you need. I'm looking now. Looks like you just shout out to Scott, but yeah, you're a pro. You're 1-0. There's a few pros around you. Obviously, a great training partner for you. It looks like he's welterweight, so a slightly bigger, taller guy. Great for you to kind of work against. And when we talk about bigger, taller, you guys are going to be fighting for the featherweight. You're going to be fighting at featherweight 145. You're 5'6". I think the general's listed at 5'10". Clearly, you're used to being the strong power wrestler against taller, rangier fighters. How has that been matching up for you, and what's it like training with Scott? I assume he's kind of that taller, leaner guy as well.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's always it's always a little bit different, right? When you get in there with somebody a little bit taller, because your range is a little more off and you got to step in and commit a little bit more sometimes, or things change in there. But I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of taller guys. Being a shorter guy myself, you're used to it, so it's like in the training room I get those looks, and come fight time, it's not a big surprise anymore. You're kind of used to how the range is going to feel.
Sure. And that's where I can tell you that like tactical mindset where you're always trying to think things through and get there's that old expression. I do think there are hard fights in MMA regardless, but there's that old expression, which I think is a good gym expression, train hard, fight easy, that a lot of guys, particularly in the MMA, kickboxing, not so much in wrestling, because I feel like wrestlers always are used to getting beat up, but the boxers, kickboxing world sometimes is a world where guys don't want to take hard rounds. They don't want to look bad in sparring or in training. I've even worked with, sometimes where like they don't want to work on their weaknesses. If it's a switch stance or if it's a new technique. But I think in wrestling, you bring that mindset of like, you always want to grind and get better. I don't think wrestlers ever are satisfied. That's one of the reasons why it's good. And I'm certainly not throwing shade on boxers and kickboxers. A lot of them are super hard workers, but it's more visually in sparring with MMA rules. It's more visually who's winning and losing. And I always had to say when I was running a gym that like we don't talk about winning and losing rounds in sparring, because we actually sometimes, and people wouldn't know it, a fighter with more skills, I'd handicap them. I'd tell them they were only allowed certain things, or, they had to allow themselves to get into a bad position to fight through it, And so somebody coming in the gym, they think, oh, that dude sucks because he's in a bad spot, where really he's working out of a bad spot because I told him to put himself there, or he's limited in what he can do. So I really think that mindset and training goes a long way. You want to look good in the cage when you fight 4 to 5 times a year. It doesn't matter what it looks like in training, because you actually want it to look challenging in training. You got a great mindset. You've already talked about your gym, your coaches, and your training partners. Let's thank anybody. If you've got sponsors, let's thank them. If you don't have sponsors, this is a shout out from me to say, this is why I love doing MMA Fancast. Fighters coming up from amateur into pro and then up through the pro ranks really need sponsors. It's a great opportunity for local sponsorships, and also your name's going to get out there. This fight will be replayed on Pittsburgh TV, and so there's a lot of opportunity for people to get sort of name recognition. Do you have sponsors or other people you like to thank?
Off the top of my head, I can't really think of too many of them right now, but all my sponsors, everyone who's supporting me, coming from a military background. I got friends from all over the country reaching out to me, supporting me. So, that's always a good feeling. And all the guys at the gym, my coach, everyone who just, they really make it easy for me to be a fighter. It's not an easy thing to do, but they really take out a lot of the hard stuff, all the paperwork, all the behind the scenes stuff. They remove all that from my life. So it's like I can just focus on training and fighting. And it's like when you can do that, I'm living a great life right now. So yeah, I want to thank them a lot because it's made my life a blessing. That is for sure.
Well, and obviously thanks to everybody that's helping you in your journey. But we also know you being grateful also makes your life better. It's interesting
Yep.
how ingratitude can really poison even the best situations. So you're looking at your life through lenses of gratitude and thankfulness. Obviously, you're performing very well. You had a great amateur career. You've got an undefeated pro record. You're coming in to test yourself against a guy, and I think this is always positive, right? He's a guy at 4-2 with more experience. That if you beat him, that matters, right? You're not wasting time. And I think sometimes that can be an issue. You're not trying to like waste time fighting guys. You get a win over him. That's a notch up. You come out short, then you've got things to work on because you challenge yourself against a tough guy. I mean, that's the type mindset. That's what he's done. It's no secret. It's on his record. He got out to a 1-2 pro start, and that's what he was doing too. Challenging himself, giving himself tough fights. That's kind of what needs to happen. It's an honor having you on. I say this, I typically end up getting people on and covering people that are coming in to fight for 247 or the Pittsburgh region. But then I really like to make it my mission to follow fighters who've been on MMA Fancast as they go on. So I'd love to have you back, whether it's to talk about your fight or down the road if you end up fighting more Midwest cards. I'd still love to have you on. That's what's been kind of the most fun part for me is following guys even once they leave. Some of the belt holders for 247 amateur and pros have gone on and away. So I always like to follow people. It's a real honor having you on. I'm going to probably try to throw a couple nickname ideas out during the fight because that's one of the things broadcasters love when a guy doesn't have a fight nickname, and I can't do it ahead of time. I got to watch your fighting style, and so it's a fun thing. Something that will mean nothing to you, but I coached track and field for several years at Waynesburg University, a small D3 school in Greene County, Pennsylvania. But back in the 30s, in the 1930s, they played a football team that nobody's ever heard of, Penn State. And back then it was radio, and the guy said, "Oh, the defense of Waynesburg is swarming like Yellow Jackets," and that's why they're named the Yellow Jackets all these years later as their mascot. So it is interesting how sometimes broadcasters can kind of coin a phrase or a nickname that endures. So I'm going to do my best, and this is also a challenge to my partner in July, Ryan Kavanaugh, who's also, I'm sure, going to be throwing out nicknames. So it'll be a battle off of us, and then after the fight, you get to tell us which nickname you thought was good, even if you don't take it. It's been an honor having you on. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you.
You got it. All right. Bye-bye.